Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Cards and Coffee. I'm super glad you're here. Today we're going to do a little deck talk, and this week we're talking Virtual World. Now, there are so many options when it comes to picking a deck if you were to go out this weekend and maybe playing a remote duel or just go to a locals or something. But I think it's very important to consider what is being played in the meta and what you can play to counter it. Now, I think it is no surprise that Virtual World is obviously one of the best contenders when it comes to picking a deck that will destroy the meta. But what exactly about it makes it so good, and what keeps it from being the best deck? After all, if it beats the meta, then shouldn't that make it tier 0? Well, we're going to talk about it. I'm going to run through a deck list that I've currently been playing. That way you have an idea of something you could try out if you were going to a remote duel or locals this weekend. We'll do the card by card. I'll explain some of my choices, and maybe by the end you'll see what makes this deck so great. And just like the other profiles I've done in the past, I'll do a quick and easy combo at the end of the deck profile. So if that's something that you're interested in, please stick around. Again, it won't be anything too crazy or too insane, but honestly, it's one of my favorite combos this deck can do, and it'll give you guys a great foreground to build off of. But before we get into that, as always guys, please go grab yourself a cup of coffee or something. That way you can sit down and tune in. Thanks guys. Now, what really makes this deck so good after all? Well, when you look at all the top decks right now, they're all very monster effect reliant and have a heavy emphasis on getting cards into the graveyard to either trigger effects or have an ability to fill the graveyard with a bunch of resources to tap into later in games. So having a deck that can inherently put up soft locks to prevent those kind of things from happening would probably make for a pretty good deck. Now, there are decks out there that don't rely on these kind of mechanics, but these are the mechanics of the best decks right now, so we really got to keep that in mind when building a deck. Now, Virtual World makes for an amazing meta counter because it inherently puts up a macrocosmos, and in addition, it can lock your opponent out of monster effects at the same time. All this is pretty easy to accomplish, and it can play through hand traps pretty well, and in addition, it'll set up a kill shot for the next turn if your opponent doesn't get over it. Oh, and did I mention you get a continuous trap card that'll pop cards on the field too? So yeah, I heard Trident was pretty good. This deck has an abundance of plays and a very high ceiling, but I will say the one thing that hinders it isn't its grind game, because that's amazing as well. It's the fact that this deck's consistency can be a little, well, it leaves a lot to be desired. Now, I'm not saying that if you walk into a tournament with Virtual World, you might as well have a red brick that you set on your playmat or anything like that, but I think when it comes to deck building, you really have to be aware that this deck has some flaws, and you need to build your deck knowing that this is gonna come up in tournaments. I think if you just completely ignore the fact that your deck does have consistency issues, you're just setting yourself up to fail, especially when you could have just did a little better with your deck building to increase the odds of you having success. Again, there's a bunch of different ways you can build this deck, so I'll show you what I've got going for me, and we'll go from there. Alright, so we're going to start with the monsters first. Obviously, we're playing 3 Lulu. This is just the main search monster for your deck. In case you don't know, all the Virtual World monsters, except for like 1 or 2, have the same effect where you can special summon them from the hand by targeting a face-up Virtual World card you control, and then you'll send a Virtual World card from your deck to the graveyard that's a different card type than the one you targeted, and then you get to special summon the monster from your hand. Lulu's the best one because honestly, it gets all your plays started. If you get to resolve her effect, then chances are you should be able to go full combo, unless your opponent has some other hand traps to stop you. Speaking of hand traps, the one beautiful thing about this deck is most of the meta's hand traps aren't that great against this deck. Now yes, Ash Blossom stops Lulu, and even Nibiru has its place nuking your board, but cards like Effect Veiler and Impermanence really are average against this deck. More times than not, if you're in a position where you have to use a Veiler or an Imperm, it's on a monster that's well, it's not a Virtual World card, that's for sure, which honestly is pretty insane, because that means if your opponent's trying to stop cards that aren't your VWs, then the rest of your engine must still be flowing. This is one of the things that I personally think make this deck so powerful, is just the hand traps right now really aren't that great against this deck. After that, we are on 3 copies of GG. This is pretty standard. I think maxing out on most of these Virtual Worlds has been pretty standard for a while now, but I just really want to let you know how important it is to make sure you have these names in your deck, because Again, consistency is key, so you want to make sure you max out the potential of opening multiple Virtual World monsters, that way you can at least do combo. Honestly, as long as you can resolve one Virtual World in your hand to send a card to the grave, chances are you'll at least be able to dump Qinglong, and then Qinglong can be banished to search Lulu, and then Lulu gets the deck going from there. GG is really good because at the end phase of the turn that you've used its effect, it can add a VW from your grave to your hand. So during your first turn combo, this is a great card to make sure you search out in your combo because, well, after you go full combo, you get to add Lulu back to your hand for next turn. Again, I think I mentioned it already, but this deck has an insane recovery game and an insane grind game because every turn you're either dumping Rhoda to the grave or you're adding Lulu back to your hand. So basically you start with Rhoda and Stratos every turn. It's pretty crazy. After that, we are also on the 3 copies of Lily. This is the double Foolish Burial and 3 copies of Lao Lao. This is probably the most powerful one, but again, it does take setup. But personally, this is one of my favorites. Just being able to recur a Virtual World from the graveyard is super powerful. I like searching this card whenever I can, especially when I'm trying to play around hand traps. Just being able to put multiple bodies on the field is super versatile. And after that, we are on 2 copies of Nian Yan. Again, this isn't the craziest one. I actually would rather play 3 of this if I could fit it, but 2 is honestly perfectly fine. Now, I know I said you want to max out on the VW names, but Nian is really an exception because she doesn't get your engine going by dumping the spells and traps to the grave to start your turn. So drawing multiple of her really just doesn't accomplish anything, whereas drawing something like double Lulu or double Gigi is combo. Her effect's super important. Being able to bring herself back from the grave as a tuner is super amazing, and then again, she gets banished, and when she does, you can add one of your banished back to your deck. This is super amazing when it comes to the grind game, being able to recycle your resources like your Rhodas and your traps and any other monsters or maybe cards you banished off of Pot of Desires. This card makes for an insane card for the deck, so it's super awesome that we have it in here. Now, that's it for the monsters. Moving on to the spells, I'm on, of course, 3 copies of Calhoun. Being able to activate one of your continuous spells or traps from the deck face up onto the field is super relevant. This is one of your main combo starters. Just being able to choose which card type you need for your Virtual Worlds to start targeting to summon from hand is very, very versatile. But in all honesty, this is probably one of my favorite spell cards in the deck. Being able to search it off Lulu as well is actually pretty amazing. After that, of course, we were on 3 copies of Qinglong, just being the main like Rhoda or Searcher in the deck. Also using its effect to negate a monster effect on the field is really relevant. Turning off cards like Winda or Appaloosa is very, very useful for this deck. So even if you draw it going second, there's a very good application for it. Now, after that, I think it's pretty standard for people to be playing 2 Emergency Teleport. Again, we would have much rather had more Virtual World monsters that had effects in hand, but double teleport definitely helps, especially when it comes to getting more cards on the field for us to target with our cards in our hands. Emergency Teleport is not once per turn, so it's a pretty crazy card when it comes to spamming the field with tuners and level 3s. Honestly, this card's super free. I'm surprised that it's semi-limited. Now again, consistency is key, so I am running the 1 Upstart Goblin. I just honestly feel like you need to take every step possible to maximize the consistency of your deck. Even though this is just 1 Upstart, every little bit helps. After that, we are also playing 3 copies of Pot of Desires. Just being a Pot of Greed is obviously super amazing. You really don't care about banishing 10. You can recycle them off of your Nian Yan. And in addition, you just play so many copies of every card anyway that chances are you're going to have a copy left in your deck for whatever combo you're trying to accomplish. Another card you could play is Pot of Prosperity, and I am in love with that card, honestly, but the only problem I have with it is this deck's inherent flaw outside of consistency is the fact that you use a lot of your hand while doing your combo, meaning most of the time you might find it to where by the time you've ended your combo, you probably won't have any cards in your hand, except maybe in the end phase you get a GG effect to add like Lulu back to your hand. But more times than not, when you're resolving Qinglong and resolving Zhongwu, you're going to be discarding cards to use those effects. So one way this deck is able to keep at an even par is by using cards like Coral Dragon and Stardust Charge Warrior to replenish your hand full of cards that at least gives you discard fodder for your combo. Again, you can do these combos without drawing cards, so Prosperity is definitely still an option, but more times than not, you'd rather just have more cards than have a specific card with this deck. Again, if you have Prosperities and you want to try it out, I definitely wouldn't knock you for trying it. I really love the card. Honestly, I think it's one of the best pot cards we've had in a long, long time. Now, after that, we are playing 3 copies of Triple Tactics Talents. I have explained this before in other videos. This card is obviously insane. It has 3 ban card effects on it. I think I really don't need to explain it, but this card honestly just is so versatile for what it can do. Being able to rip hand traps out of your opponent's hands, or having another Pot of Greed, or even taking an Appaloosa that's in your way, stopping your VWs from playing the game, is so versatile. This is honestly one of my favorite cards, and anytime there's a deck that can get away playing this card, chances are I'm going to try to fit it in. Now, after that, I am on 2 one-ofs, one of them being Called by the Grave. I love this card to pieces, so you better believe I'm definitely going to play it, especially in a combo deck. And the last one of I'm playing is 1 Foolish Burial Goods. Now, I know this probably looks a little weird and makes you think, Justin, why the heck would you randomly play 1 Foolish Burial Goods? First off, let me just explain how insanely versatile this card is. This one card essentially has 3 effects. You can essentially make it a Rhoda, a Monster Reborn, or even a level modulator. By dumping your continuous spells and continuous traps, this card is so versatile for what it can do. Now, I know what you're thinking, Justin, if this card's so amazing, why would you not play more copies of it? Honestly, I could see myself running more than 1 of this, but the reason I've decided to go with 1 is I never want to see multiples of this card in my hand, and in addition, these graveyard effects make you discard cards, and like I mentioned earlier, you really don't want to waste the cards in your hand, because that's what's really important in the grind game and the follow-up for the turn after. But again, I don't want my deck to be so reliant on this card, or at least being forced to activate this card when really having another card to do your combo probably would have been better. By running 1, you guarantee you'll never draw multiples, and again, if for whatever reason you have it and you don't need it, this deck discards cards from its hands all the time, so just discard it if you don't need it. Now, after Foolish Burial Goods, I do have 1 more tech card that I really like in this deck that I really just don't see a lot of people playing right now. A lot of people have been playing Forbidden Droplets to help break boards when they're going second, because in their eyes, there's a lot of synergy with discarding cards like Qinglong, or maybe even any of the traps that you want in the graveyard to bring back for later. But what they don't realize is the hidden cost to that is you've already minused by discarding cards, and then to activate those effects, you're gonna have to discard more cards. In my personal opinion, the card that is amazing in this deck is 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More. Essentially, this is Forbidden Droplets, but cost-free. And that's for your wallet as well. This card's insanely cheap. The reason I truly love this card in this deck so much is because, again, your deck is so resource reliant that being able to just have 1 card that turns off an entire field is so insane for this deck. Again, your deck can OTK out of nowhere, so yes, it takes that away from you whenever you do activate this, but you should win on just pure advantage after resolving this card effect. Now, there is a perk to running Droplet for the fact that it's a defensive card as well, so you can always set it and then activate it to negate an effect on your opponent's turn. And that option isn't really there for Dark Ruler, but even when you go first, I still would argue this card is good to draw. Again, your first turn combo is all about discarding cards out of your hands to resolve your graveyard effects anyway, so essentially if this card is dead, just get rid of it and replace it with another card. This strategy actually comes from a while back when Dragon Link and Virtual World were like the 2 main decks of the format. Now, at that time, this deck was more of a VFD deck, but the logic is still there, and it's honestly super sound. So trust me when I say you do not need to spend $450 on a playset of Forbidden Droplets, when Dark Ruler No More, in my honest opinion, is way better in this deck. And in addition, I haven't mentioned it yet, but we are obviously playing Tzolk'in. So all the spell cards I've just showed you in the profile are just fodder to be set from your hand to trigger the Tzolk'in and bring out your Crystal Wing for free. And again, if your opponent somehow breaks your board, well, now you have a Dark Ruler for the clapback. Again, this deck's engine is insane in the grind game, and the resources are amazing once you get the ball rolling. So having a card like this just to turn off whatever the heck is in your way makes for an insane tech card for this deck. Moving on to the trap cards, we are playing 2 Chuche. Obviously, popping face-up cards is insane. In addition, it recycles all your VW cards that are banished. This card is probably one of the most important cards to this deck's engine to make sure it gets established turn 1. In addition, this card helps you play through hand traps by popping your own monsters to dodge Effect Veiler or you name it. This card's pretty crazy for what it can do, and honestly, I would play 3 if I had the room. After that, we are obviously on the 1 Zongwu, the Monster Reborn for the deck. You don't really need this card, but it comes up a lot for me, especially when I'm trying to play through hand traps. And for the last trap card, I am on 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. I don't know if you noticed earlier, but I didn't have any other hand traps in the deck. So you might be scratching your head like, Justin, why would you play Impermanence and not something like Ash Blossom or Gamma or Nibiru or something that's more high impact? And the reason being is, well, it's super simple, but it's honestly super important. This is a trap card, so you can set it to trigger Tzolk'in. Again, like I've been saying this whole deck profile, it's all about consistency, and even my hand traps, I've made sure to have some kind of synergy with what the heck my deck is trying to do. With the addition of Dark Ruler no more, you could even justify playing no hand traps, but I just really like having these, because again, it's just another card to draw as your 6th card, and again, worst case scenario, you can set it to trigger your Tzolk'in. Getting yourself a free Crystal Wing is always amazing. So that's my main deck, 40 cards, super simple, but I think this list honestly is super sound and solid. All right, guys, before we get to the extra deck, I just wanted to say, if you haven't seen it already, I am doing a progression series with a good friend of mine, Ricardo, and honestly, I am a big fan of Simo's progression series, so I had to hop on the hype, and honestly, things are getting pretty insane. Our series actually plays out a little bit differently than Simo's, mainly because we have access to starter decks in our series. So not only do we get some amazing staples along the way, but our ban cards are ridiculous. If you are as big a fan of the progression as I am, please go check it out. It's honestly been so much fun. Now, moving on to the extra deck, I honestly don't think there's anything too crazy, but I'll show you what I've liked playing for the last few weeks now. For the level 9 synchros, we have the 1 Shen Shen and the 1 Vermilion Dragon Mech. Shen Shen's just your boss monster. Being able to recur himself from the grave every turn is really amazing. Plus, being a Macrocosmos, well, I don't need to explain how Macrocosmos basically turns off every deck right now. Drytron, Tri-Brigade, Sky Striker, Dragon Link, Shaddoll, the list goes on, honestly. This card is insane to go into first turn, and it's honestly super easy. This card is personally one of my favorite cards. I remember reading this card when it first came out and saw it was generic, and I just knew this card was a house. After that, the Vermilion Dragon Mech honestly is just an amazing tech card. Being able to pop any card out of your way, especially when going for game, is super useful. In addition, there are times where you'll need to pop itself and you'll banish something like a Lulu as cost. Then Vermilion will get its effect engraved to add the Lulu you just banished back to your hand, and now, well, you just essentially searched Lulu, so now it's time to full combo. On to the level 6s, we have the Coral Dragon and the Stardust Charge Warrior. Again, just generic level 6s that let you draw. One's a tuner, one's not. We also have 1 Juju. Again, this card doesn't come up all the time, but the fact that it's a virtual world name is honestly pretty relevant. There are some awkward hands where you're forced to make this card. That way you at least have a target for your monster effects in your hand, so please. I know at first glance this card might not seem very powerful, but its utility is super important. After that, again, we are playing the 1 Muddy Mud Dragon just to fuse off into our fusion at the end of the combo. And of course, Tzolk'in, just being able to summon a Dragon Synchro from your extra deck for free is, well, it's pretty insane. For the Dragon Synchro, obviously, I've mentioned him before. We are playing the 1 Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. This monster's effect is honestly amazing, helping stop hand traps like Nibiru during your combo is always very useful. And then, of course, the soft lock that's created when alongside Invoked Kaliga is honestly really unfair. Putting these two side by side along with a Chuche in the back row makes for a near impossible board to break with any of the decks in the meta right now. Moving on to the XYZs of the deck, the only rank 3 I'm playing right now is 1 Gossip Shadow. You can obviously play something like Break Sword to help break boards, or Fortune Tune to set up Zeus plays, but personally, I've been really liking Gossip Shadow. It's really good going first, because obviously you can make it part of your end board as a pseudo monster negate, or even better, you can use it before going off and using it to negate hand traps. Honestly, it's one of my favorite cards. For the rank 6s, I'm playing 1 Fan, 1 Utopia Beyond, and 1 Ptolemy M7. The thing I love the most about the XYZ lineup of this deck is that it's so toolbox. There are so many different options you can play, and in addition, whatever you do choose to play gives your deck an abundance of options when trying to either break a board or set up a first turn play or play through hand traps. Honestly, I think that's what makes this deck so great. Fan's just great at outing cards on the field or in the grave. Utopia Beyond, obviously being a non-targeting effect, helps you out cards like Dragoons, and M7 being one of my personal favorites, can bounce any monster from the field or grave to the hand, meaning if there's a monster in your way, obviously you can just get rid of it. Or even better, in game 2 and game 3, after you side the hand traps that are turn skips like Artifact Lancia or Droll and Lockbird, being able to do your first turn combo and then make an M7 to add the turn skip back to your hand after you used it turn 1, yeah, that's pretty crazy. For the last monsters in the extra deck, I am playing one Gaia Dragon just to throw on top of the rank 6s for my Divine Arsenal AA Zeus. Again, I've probably mentioned this a few times now, but any deck that can make this card definitely should. This card honestly should be banned, so as long as we can play this, well, I'm definitely going to be playing it. Alright guys, that's it for the deck list. Nothing too crazy, but I think the important thing to take away is the consistency and the simplicity of the deck helps make it to where this deck more often than not will be able to play the game and in addition be able to break boards that might stop you from doing otherwise. So I'm going to show you guys a quick combo. Again, there's 100 different lines with this specific deck. One thing that makes this deck so beautiful is, well, it can be pretty complicated, but it definitely rewards the player that's willing to put in the time, learn a bunch of different combos, and how to play around hand traps. Today, I'm just going to show you a really simple combo, but honestly, it's one of my favorites. You're going to end your board with Crystal Wing, Kaliga, and Chuche, and in addition, you'll play around Nibiru at the same time. Again, you could probably take this same combination of cards and make an even greater board, but the fact that we get to play around Nibiru in the process, well, that's pretty crazy in my eyes. So, starting things off, the obvious thing we're going to start with is activating Virtual World Calhoun from our hand, searching our deck for the Chuche and activating it on the field, giving our Lulu a target to summon herself from the hand. Activating Lulu's effect to summon, we will target the trap card and send a spell card from our deck to the graveyard, and then obviously summon the Lulu and now add a monster. In this case, I'm going to add GG. After all that, we will activate the GG to summon it from the hand by targeting Lulu and dumping a trap to the grave. Now, in the end phase, we will get to add a card back to our hand, so keep that in mind. It's very easy to forget that. After that, we will use the Qinglong Engrave, removing it from play to add a Lily from our deck to our hand, and then discard any card that you don't need from your hand to the graveyard. After that, of course, we will now activate the Lily. We're going to target a monster again. It doesn't really matter which one. Summon it from our hand, and we're going to dump one spell and one trap. In this case, it's a Zhongwu and another Qinglong. Again, we've used Qinglong already this turn, so Qinglong for next turn just makes it to where this grind game is pretty insane. Now, after that, we are going to activate our Chuche Engrave, banishing itself and targeting our Lulu to increase its level by 3. Now that Lulu's a level 6, we are going to perform our first Synchro Summon and send these two to the graveyard to summon our one Ultimaya Tzolk'in. Now, I don't know if you've been counting, but this is our 4th summon. So like I said, we're going to play around Nibiru by setting a spell or trap from our hand onto the field, triggering Tzolk'in to special summon the very powerful Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. Now again, he came out on the 5th summon, so it's very easy to negate Nibiru if your opponent tried to. In addition, some people try to get fancy and activate Nibiru right now, forcing you to negate with Crystal Wing, only to chain their Effect Veiler or Infinite Impermanence in their hand. But what they don't realize is, honestly, they weren't that smart because Chuche is live, so you can chain the Chuche, shuffling these two back to the deck to destroy your own Crystal Wing, making it to where when Effect Veiler or Infinite Impermanence tries to resolve, your monster is no longer on the field, guaranteeing its effect to negate Nibiru still resolves. Yes, you did lose your Crystal Wing, but your combo still isn't done. You have a bunch of recursion in the form of Zhongwu. So again, while your opponent might think they have one up on you, you definitely have the options to help stop them in their tracks. Now, assuming your opponent doesn't have Nibiru and Effect Veiler or Impermanence, the next thing we're going to activate is the trap card Zongwu from our graveyard to now special summon Lulu from the graveyard back to the field, and then discarding the last card in our hand to the graveyard. After that, we have a tuner and a non-tuner, so we will use them to synchro for 6. Making our Muddy Mud Dragon, and then immediately using his effect to fusion summon with Tzolk'in to the graveyard for the one and only invoked Kaliga. Again, this is the combo, nothing too crazy. You'll end your turn, Lulu will go back to hand, and we have one card set that was a spell or trap. It can honestly be anything. We have the monster negate and the lock with Kaliga to prevent basically any monster effects from happening that turn. You have Chuche to pop anything that hits the field. Lulu's in your hand to follow up for next turn, and in addition, we have a Qinglong in the grave to search another card during your next turn. Now that's it for the combo, and that's it for the deck profile. I'm super thankful if you guys stuck around till the end of the video. I honestly have a lot of fun making these videos, so please let me know if there's any other decks that you want to see. Let me know. I have a bunch of deck profiles I'm actually in the process of making right now, so if you'd like to add to the list, please let me know down below. I would gladly be able to do it for you guys. Again, if you haven't seen the progression series yet, please go check it out. It's been super fun, and honestly, it's getting really insane. Once again, guys, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate everything. Here's hoping to see you guys next episode. Peace.